Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us at our Baroque Lovers ASO at Home this week. Before we get started, I'm going to let some of the participants roll in the next minute. We got about 20 people already. Oh, goodness. Thanks for joining us, everybody. So as I said a second ago, thank you for joining us for our ASO at Home Baroque Lovers this week. I appreciate you all taking the time to sit down with us on this Tuesday evening and hear from some of our musicians about their work and music in the Baroque scene. So just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. If you would like to ask a question to any of the panelists, please feel free to click the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and we will get to those as able. You can also pose them in the chat section as well. And if for some reason we don't get to those questions before the end of this evening, I will take note of those and try to get those answered to you afterwards. So anyway, with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pass the screen over to Dr. Alicia Chapman, who is going to be our host this evening. So thanks for joining us.
Hey, good evening, everyone. In the words of Carl Haas. I'm sure many of us remember Adventures in Good Music, and tonight this is so exciting. First of all, I'm so excited to see my friends on the screen and to know that the ASU friends and family, I'm sorry, the ASO, excuse me, I'm connected to both. Friends and family, and hopefully some ASU friends and family are joining us too tonight. I'm Alicia Chapman, I'm Principal Oboist with the Asheville Symphony. And I'm also Associate Professor of Oboe at Appalachian State University, ASU. I play Baroque oboe with the North Carolina Baroque Orchestra and freelance in the Southeast region. So I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you for joining us. Vance, tell us about you.
Well, I see that Alicia brought her instruments and I brought mine. It's hard to squeeze into my house, but I did it. I'm Vance Reese. I usually play bass in the orchestra. There is no pipe organ, and Thomas Wolfe, who would have thought to put one in there? But I've been co-principal with Lee Metcalf for several years, and very happy to be still playing with the orchestra when we get around to playing again. So I'll pass it to Todd.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm Todd Mueller. I play principal timpani with Asheville Symphony, and I teach at a small college, Georgia Gwinnett College, outside of Atlanta. So I freelance in that region, and you know, I'm sure we'll get into this. Baroque music wouldn't be in my wheelhouse, but it does influence everyone who is classically trained, and so I have a long history with it. So looking forward to sharing it. Amy?
I guess I will go next. Hello, everyone. I am Amy Cherry, and I am so excited to be here and see people that I haven't seen for a very long time. I am the former third trumpet with the Asheville Symphony. I held that position for about 10 years until my family relocated up north to Westchester, Pennsylvania, and that's where I am right now. We're outside of Philadelphia. I am, or was until March, a freelance musician in the Philadelphia area. I'm also fortunate to be associated with an organization called the International Women's Brass Conference. I'm the vice president of that organization. I play with the Athena Brass Band, and I'm also currently the instructor of trumpet at Millersville University, which is part of the Pennsylvania system near Lancaster. And I have a brass duo with my husband, Dan Cherry. We have a trumpet and trombone duo called the Balaton Chamber Brass. So I dabble in all things and have been fortunate to love and play Baroque music all along my career. So I'm very thankful to be here and really appreciate the invitation to participate.
So Amy, I imagine one of your brass groups has played with organ, like
yes,
music with organ.
Yes, and I have done some solo works with organ, and I actually was lucky to do a recording project last week where we were doing some large brass choir things and organ as well. There was a little bit of Baroque music kind of scattered in that program as well.
Yeah, it's a great combination, I think.
It is.
Hey, don't leave the timpani out of that combination.
Ever.
My Easter gig every year is one of my favorite jobs that I play because of an excellent organist down at Emory. Timothy Albrecht is his name, and then Chris Martin has come in and played that gig with us, and a few other very notable trumpet players. So, you know, the instruments just seem to work together.
I think one of the first albums I listened to that was completely Baroque music was brass, organ, and percussion, and it was the Telemann heroic music, E Power Biggs.
Okay.
Right.
So it's good stuff.
Was percussion strictly timpani on that one? Do you remember?
I think it's a little bit more, but mostly timpani. Timpani was kind of the go-to.
Okay.
I see Olivia has asked a question to all of us. Or looks to me.
Specifically to you, Vance.
So Olivia, I'm not really, this isn't really my house. It's, I win the award. Oh, thank you. It's one of the largest organs in the world, as you can tell by the ornate features in the background and just the layout of the organ. It is from or modeled after the Baroque organs of yore. This is in Passau, Germany, in the Bavarian part of Germany. 17,000 pipes. So pretty big.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, everyone, I hate to let you know that Dr. Chapman, her signal is a little shaky this evening. Somebody lives way out in the mountains up in Boone. So hopefully she'll be able to join back on shortly. But in the meantime, I guess I should introduce myself really quickly because I technically am a panelist for this. My name is Amanda Vollrath. For those of you that do not know me, I am the new development and patron relations specialist here at the Asheville Symphony. So all those emails you get these days, I'm the person behind those. And anyway, I'm just so happy to be here. And for this conversation, relevant, I am actually a vocalist. And so we'll be speaking from that point of view. And I know, Vance, you will also have some things to say in that regard for sure. So that's a little background on myself. As we get going, I realized that we kind of like jumped into speaking about Baroque music, and I'm not entirely sure if every person that's watching right now actually knows what Baroque music, what that period is, kind of just like a real brief history of that. And who would one of you be willing to kind of take that quick? I know that's like lumping 150 years into 2 minutes, but who would like to chime in on that one?
Amy looks pretty eager.
Okay, go ahead.
Wait, Todd, did you raise your hand?
I did, just because you didn't look eager enough, but now I see it.
No, you go ahead, Todd. And I'll
Okay,
chime in
well,
with anything that comes to mind.
You know, as musicologists, we look back at the history of primarily European or Western music, and we put these borders on different style periods within the history. And so, roughly 1600 to exactly 1750, because that's the year that Bach died, is when we call the Baroque style period. And the style periods, in a general sense, we try to see the broader characteristics or aesthetics of the music of the time. And I think that the best visual that we can give you right now is to look behind Vance at that organ, because the word Baroque, obviously, it actually refers to a misshaped pearl that was popular in the jewelry of the time, and it was kind of this overdone aesthetic, is the way I look at it. Now, I walked into churches in Bavaria, and I'm sure many of you who are in this participant pool also have done this. And even when I was young and I went in, I looked around and I was awe-inspired by the detail, but it still, for me and the era that I grew up in and the music I listened to, felt a little much. And I think that the detail is what's impressive to me about Baroque. So somebody else take over.
Amy, you go.
Okay, I'll just add, having seen some of those churches as well, that visually they can be very impressive and perhaps a little daunting with all of that detail. But for me as a trumpet player, one of the things that I really appreciate about the time period is the evolution of my instrument and the roles that it was allowed to kind of step up and be focused on, because what we were doing prior to that was very different. And it has to do with the evolution of the instrument, the crafting of the instrument, and some of the changes that were made. And I have a few things here that I can show a little bit, maybe when we get into specific instruments. But I really appreciate the energy and the soloistic nature of a lot of the trumpet parts that came about during this time period. And I'll go with that idea of energy again. For me, Baroque music is very much about motion. And I tend to appreciate that kind of the movement, the energy, and those details are things that just bring a lot of joy when I'm listening and playing.
Yeah, both those are great answers. I don't have much to add. My attraction to Baroque music came honestly as a keyboardist, and really the keyboard, mostly talking about harpsichords, but also pipe organs, came into their own in the late Renaissance and early Baroque period. And an organ like this would have been from the late Baroque period. The more ornate, the later in the period. But that's, the Italians were kind of the driving force for change for the Baroque period. And so they came up with some innovative things like using space, using a choir in one balcony and a choir in another balcony. And then, you know, a brass choir could be in one area and then in another. And so you got this sonic representation that was really the progenitor of orchestras. So if you like orchestral music, those are the roots. That's where it came
as well as opera.
I was just about to
The
say,
Italians.
as a singer, I can't say I don't like Baroque music, because all the music that I sing really was, well, I should say, originated during the Baroque period. The first opera was written at the very beginning of that time period. And also the oratorio and the cantata are also types of vocal music that originated during the Baroque period. And you talking about the ornateness of the churches, and that really relates to at least to the vocalist, a huge part of singing Baroque music is this, you know, I'm not going to give an example on here, but you know, that the trills and the, you know, and of course everybody thinks of as a soprano, you know, Handel, and just you're singing this one word and you've got 16 notes on the page for that one word, and that kind of for me sums up Baroque music. I mean, that's what it was all about, that showiness and that detail, that ornamentation.
Amanda, have you sung much Baroque music? Any of the oratorio?
I have. You know, it's one of those things where it's a kind of a love-hate relationship where I resisted it for a long time. I came into being a singer as originally a pianist. I played piano my entire life, and was actually, and still, I'm hugely in love with impressionistic, that time period, French impressionistic. And so I was a very rare singer in that I wanted to sing nothing but French impressionistic music. And when I was in college, it was very quickly like, it's time for you to start to delving into some other music here. And when I really got into some of the Baroque music, obviously the oratorios are my personal favorite. I just think that I finally got to get my hand on some music that really got to show the voice off, and really push the technique to a whole nother level that you just don't really quite get as a singer in other types of other periods of music. Definitely. It just has its own set of skills, just like all of you can, I'm sure, speak to.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, Amanda, you and Amy and Alicia would especially appreciate this word Fortspinnung. I'll have to type that out in the chat.
Yes, you definitely need to. Well, everyone will love that. So, Dr. Chapman, real quick, since you just got on, I wanted to turn it back over to you. We were kind of giving a little, when we got into this conversation about talking a little bit to the panelists and the attendees about the history of Baroque music, and really just giving a very quick, brief overview of what that time period looked like for those that are not, steeped in this all the time.
Yes, yeah. Well, I was glad to hear you talking about some of the Italian music, because I think in general, most of the Baroque music we know is the 18th century, the high German, high Baroque music. But I'll tell you what, that early Baroque 17th century Italian music, there's nothing like it. And you're right, that's the birthplace of opera and a lot of the Italian style, which fed into the other styles, the other national styles in Baroque music throughout Europe. So, I'm just glad to hear the conversation.
Well, I'm going to turn it back over to you now and let you I know you've got a flood of questions. So.
I will just say I'm having some internet problems, so I guess we're going with the flow here.
It's okay. That's the world we live in these days.
It is, and I just want to say how authentic we actually are being tonight. Baroque music being talked, a conversation, an intimate conversation amongst friends. I know our listeners are gathered in maybe with each other. Maybe some are in coffee houses, maybe some are in a pub, probably not, but at least a living room and a back porch. And that's exactly how, we tend to think Baroque music, we associate a lot with the church and sacred music, but the secular side of it too, it was just as we're doing now. So, okay. So, I thought it would be fun. I'm just fascinated by how you got that instrument in your house, Vance. I don't think we've started talking about our instruments yet, have we?
Oh, no, not. I've talked about this one, which is a big one in southern Germany.
Yeah,
but
awesome.
The one most often used, like if I were to accompany Alicia, might be a little chamber organ of 4 stops. And actually there is one now at Brevard College where I work. It's about the size of half a dining room table. And within this box, so the performer would stand up probably or sit on a stool to play it. And it actually has a mechanism where you can change the pitch, which is nice. And then you have from 1 to 4 stops that you can use. So it's a good chamber instrument and perfect for Baroque sonatas. Maybe wouldn't match the power of a trumpet, but might, I don't know.
Yes, in fact, the portative organ is used for the more intimate movements of all the cantatas, the oratorios, the passions. The solo arias will often have the orchestra drop out, and then the portative organ accompanied by, or not really accompanied, but joined by the continuo team. Right. So yes, that certainly is in keeping with how the instruments were sounding and how they are very different from the modern instruments. I'm going to go to Todd because I am just so fascinated by the role of percussion in Baroque music, and we don't usually associate percussion in Baroque music. And we all know Handel's Messiah and the Hallelujah chorus, and the big Amen at the end of the Messiah is just, to me, spectacular timpani music. And I actually have a very short excerpt if we have time and you want me to do that. But could you lead us through the percussion?
Sure.
Good.
So it's interesting that my first percussion experience, and I'm sorry if I'm taking it, I planned on saying this, so I want to say it. My first percussion experience with Baroque music was playing Bach transcriptions in percussion ensemble in high school. So everyone must play Bach, and I also played piano growing up. But obviously, the main role of timpani in the Baroque orchestral setting is in hand with the trumpet to accentuate the big moments. And so it's how we made our way as timpanists into the orchestra from being a guild military style instrument in Europe at the time. They would bring in, and this is the story of percussion. Forgive me for being flighty in my explanation, but the story of percussion is military instrument that gets invited indoors to be a special effect for big moments. And you could think of that in the opera world with all of the battery percussion. That's the main reason we hear any percussion in orchestral music, or at least that's the entry point. But the entry point for timpani was earlier because of the use of timpani with the trumpets. So it was a very different instrument than what we see today, though, because they were literally taking the instrument off of horseback, bringing it indoors, and then playing it in the orchestral setting. If you let me share the screen with you real quick, I got some pictures I can show you. So,
Fantastic.
so this is a book by a enthusiast. I haven't shared it yet, sorry. Get used to doing this after having all of the classes now are online. We're getting better at these technological tricks here. This book is by an enthusiast named Edmund Bowles, who did some extensive work just putting together evidence of the instruments, pictorial evidence, writing letters, things like this, compiling them into this book. So as you can see, these are the timpani on horseback. As you would have seen, this top picture is 1676. The middle picture here is 1721, and then this is the more Arab-looking use, Turkish, I should say, use, and this is where the instrument originally comes from, along with the cymbals and the bass drum and the triangle. We get most of our percussion instruments that we hear in the orchestra from Turkey, and you'll notice they're much smaller in size than what we have now. I am going to flip to a set of these drums. And these would be something we would call Baroque timpani. They have an actual skin head on them because there was no plastic, of course. And they have these tuning pegs, as you can see around the instrument here, which you would have to individually turn to change the pitch. So with Baroque music, one of the features for timpani is that there are no tuning changes. You start with 2 notes and you stay with those 2 notes throughout. And this matches, I believe, Amy, with the limitations of the trumpet, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it wasn't until the mid 1800s really that you start to get a lot of quick pitch changes on timpani. So hearing these drums, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, hearing these drums is a much different experience than hearing the modern timpani like I have behind me here, performing Baroque music. So period performance is something I'm interested in. Financially, there are limitations to doing it, but my first period performance on Baroque timpani happened in college at Florida State University. And I got to play on calf skin drums that were these small timpani, and it is a completely different sonic experience. It is much less defined pitch-wise than what we have now. So I find it to be interesting. It changes the way that composers would write for the instrument in a big way. But it still is the first piece, Alicia, to wrap this, to come around to the beginning of your question. The first piece that I give students to learn out of the literature is the Hallelujah Chorus, because for 2 reasons. It's a wonderful example of what happens to you on timpani. If you're used to only counting in 4-bar phrases, you can really trip up on this one. It is a tonic and dominant tuning, which is important, but you will also be hired to play that piece probably before any other piece if you are a working musician. So it is a great joy to play it. It's not one that I ever get tired of. So, but it is a small part. When I get hired to play the entire oratorio, which hasn't happened, or one part, like the first part, and then they add the Hallelujah Chorus, it is a lot of sitting and waiting. So
Yes.
Vance, I'm sorry to cut you off.
You learn patience, but your moments are glorious in that piece. Thank you so much.
Yes.
This is a great segue into talking about the Baroque trumpet, since, as Todd mentioned, you are paired together almost
Sure.
in the bigger orchestral pieces.
Yeah, I'm really glad that he made the outdoor versus indoor distinction, because that is a big part of what trumpets did before the Baroque period, was a lot of signaling along with our percussion friends. But the opportunities during the Baroque period really kind of expanded. So I will show you a couple of the things that I have, just to kind of give you a sense of how things changed. So we'll start with this, and I'll back up a little bit so we can get the whole thing in the screen.
Nice.
So this is an example of a Baroque trumpet. I wouldn't, if we use the term natural trumpet, we're generally talking about a bent instrument that kind of reaches about 8 feet in length, that doesn't use any kind of vent holes. This particular one does. I don't know if you can see them up close. So for that reason, I wouldn't technically call this a natural trumpet. I would call it kind of a vented Baroque trumpet. But the principle of this instrument is similar to something that Todd mentioned. When we have this instrument set up, we can play in one key, and that key is determined by, again, the length of the tubing that we have available to us. So the trumpet is an instrument that is built on something called the harmonic series. So we have certain numbers or certain varieties of pitches that are available to us, again, governed by the length of the tubing that we're dealing with. So if a trumpet player wanted to play in one particular key, that would work well. If they needed to change to another key, there needed to be an adjustment to the equipment. And one way that you might do that would be to change. So you see, I'm showing you kind of a little bit of the end of the bend, and a different crook. So if you can see, the length of this is greater, which means that we're going to kind of drop the pitch of the instrument by making it a little bit longer. So in music, if we needed to change from one key area to another, we physically had to alter the instrument to be able to do that. Couple of things, just kind of tagging along with what Todd was saying. One of the things that's unique about this is the shape of the bell is different. Obviously, the metal makeup is different, and these instruments were a lot softer. So that was something that trumpet players had to learn how to deal with. Coming in from outside and doing all of their signaling, this represented a very different type of technique. You'll see in Baroque music a reference to the clarino, to the kind of high-pitched trumpet that would have been doing a lot of the melody parts up in the extreme high register. And typically, like even when you look at music by Bach and by Telemann, sometimes you'll see 3 trumpet parts written in their orchestral works, and the top 2 parts will be referred to as clarino parts. They are the ones kind of playing that melodic line. And then the third part is the principal part, which would be sitting next to the timpani, and kind of doubling along with that particular role. So just to kind of give you an idea of how things have evolved, this would have been about an 8-foot long instrument. And in comparison to today's modern trumpets, our modern B-flat trumpet is about a 4-foot long instrument. So in terms of the pitch relativity, we're looking at something that is pitched an octave higher than what would have been accessible on that longer instrument. And what's kind of interesting is if you attend typical orchestra concerts, not historical, period instrument concerts, but more modern orchestras, you will see trumpet players using these. And I'll step back again. This is a modern day piccolo trumpet, which has a length of about maybe 2 feet. So again, the relationship here is an octave higher. So those clarino parts that were written originally for kind of a massive instrument and played in that higher register were softer, were emulating voice techniques, were really kind of following along with the way a vocalist would sing, grouping 2 notes at a time and kind of putting certain types of emphasis. So we today attempt to do those same kinds of things on a much stronger instrument, and kind of try to copy those older styles on modern technique. The good thing about this is it makes life a lot more secure because we're playing a higher pitched instrument. It's a lot easier to access some of those notes. That's the thing about that Baroque trumpet. Without those valves to help you find your way, you really have to rely on your ear training to be able to do that. So I hope that helps. And
oh, that's great, Amy. And you reminded me of so many things to talk about. The idea of having the 3 trumpet players, that's very common in Bach. And I'm thinking of the B minor mass in particular, when there's just that one movement with the natural horn. And often the 3rd trumpet player would move over and play the horn part. And so it's just confirming what you were saying about how flexible and how good the ear must be, and agile the embouchure must be to play this instrument. Fantastic. Well, that's great. You know, I do have a screen share. I'd love to just play the final moment of the Messiah, the big Amen at the end, and we see both trumpets and timpani. So I'm going to try to locate the excerpt, which was lost, I must say, a little bit when I disappeared from the screen. But here we go. Let's see if this brings us. Okay, to me, that is just outstanding excitement there, and just such, what beautiful sound. On the Baroque trumpet, as marvelous as it does sound, and as captivating as it is on the modern instruments, to hear it on the actual Baroque trumpet with the timpani. And Todd, I noticed in the chat, someone was asking about the sticks that you would use. You would be able to tell from the sound of that recording what the timpanist was using. It's not like your modern timpani sticks.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to hear because of the quality from here, but I'm going to assume that it was a period performance. I couldn't see the timpani at any moment, but the idea was that the sticks that were used up until the 1820s probably were not covered in any kind of dampening felt or cloth. So originally, some of the earliest sticks were actually made of ivory or wood. I have a few sets here. So a kind of mallet that I would normally use now with the orchestra, just kind of a general mallet, is this. And these are wooden shafts with felt. And I don't know how this sounds. Nothing sounds good unless I have. But it doesn't have a lot of definition. Whereas I bought these sticks, I ordered them from the timpanist of the Vienna Philharmonic, Manfred Kaufmann, and he made these museum replicas. So this is a set of mallets that was in a museum, a Baroque set, and he just copied the dimensions and spun out his own, or turned his own. And they are completely made of wood. So if I played... It's a much different sound. It is much more articulate and punchy, so it hits harder. I like to think of the job of a timpanist as deciding whether or not to be a homogeneous or a heterogeneous member of the orchestra. Am I going to blend my sound with the basses or always with the trumpet, or am I going to stick out like a drummer Oh, and so I think the Baroque style is really to stick out a lot on the front side, especially when you combine these with the calf skin heads that would be used from the time, or even goat skin. So yeah, those are interesting Baroque mallets. Now, a side note, I have never used these in performance. They are very, very awkward. They look neat. I would use some normal wooden mallets that look more like this if I was actually playing. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to hearing your ornate timpani sticks. And
Yeah.
the shallowness of the Baroque timpani actually takes away some of that huge boom.
That's right.
Well, this is great. So Amanda, I want to hearing that high A in the handle.
We're gonna be missing that this Christmas.
That's I want to steer it towards you, and I'm going to just change topics a little bit with the idea of vocal music in the Baroque, and the whole idea how the Baroque period brought to life once again the idea of speaking, oratory, the rhetorical style. It looks back upon ancient technique of the art of persuasion, right? Through speaking, the Baroque composers brought that to the music of this time period. And but you're in a slightly different category, because you can use text to move the emotions of the listener, which was the whole point of rhetorical style and the doctrine of the affections, to have affection and love and jealousy and joy all well up in the listener was really the point of every composer's composition on one level or another. So could you tell us a little bit about how fortunate the singers are? You can actually use the text. How do you bring the affects or the emotion to life in Baroque music?
Well, and this actually, I was thinking about when all of you were showing your different instruments or the different types of and forms of your instrument that was used during that time. And for a vocalist, it's very, that's the difficulty we have, where you're using the same instrument. So when you approach any type of music, when we're talking about Baroque, but in reality, Baroque was a very large period of time where there are many different types of styles of singing. Early Baroque music, it harks back to an earlier time and a very different way of using the voice, and definitely a different purpose in the singing. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, Alicia, is, in the Baroque period, just like with all other instruments in music, the voice and operas and orchestra were meant to evoke these very deep feelings, when really, honestly, prior to that time, that was not what singing or music was really about. So this was the first time that singers got to take center stage and let their voice and the text move the audience and really help be a part of creating these feelings, rather than being a part of, really, historically, it was, just like part of the church and not meant to evoke these central emotional feelings. So, as a singer, it's kind of, I don't want to go into a bunch of technicalities of how you approach that, but totally, it's all based on, for example, if you approach an opera, it's all about understanding what the role is, but more importantly than that is, there's the language that you're singing. You've got the German and you've got the Italian, and during that time period and all beyond that, those composers of those types of operas were really looking to have a different type of singer, but also portray something differently than
and
that kind of makes sense. But from a very technical standpoint, just a few things that come to mind. The most obvious for a lot of people is the level of vibrato. and the level of thick, I like to use so I'm not using a bunch of musical terms, the thickness, the heaviness of the voice. Again, that's all based on the composer, based on the period of Baroque music that we're talking about, because when you get into that earlier Baroque music, you're still, for example, I am a singer who has a very large voice and a lot of vibrato. And when I start to, it's very difficult for me to approach some of that much earlier music when that was not something that was used. But as you start to get into the once operas are coming on the scene, and everybody knows Marriage of Figaro and the slew of famous operas that you think of come from this time period where the singer becomes, even beyond the text, it's all about the voice. It's all about using the power and the tone of the voice to evoke that feeling. Sometimes the phrases are repeated over and over and over again. So that kind of idea of poetry came much later, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this.
No.
And I'm trying to talk down without using a bunch of vocal technique terms.
You actually led us very nicely when you say poetry to the idea of the music taking the shape of the words and what we know as word painting, and how through the music we can actually show what the words are meaning and what you are singing. We are able to show through the shape of notes, like you were saying, the vibrato was more of an ornament and not a constant part of the tone, but
right.
was used for special effect and for intensity. So this idea, and this is something we all have experienced, this idea of word painting when we're trying to bring a gesture to a phrase in Baroque music so that we are matching what you are doing as the singer. If it's okay, I have, but let me ask you, was the screen share a musical example? Was that clear?
It's so hard over the.
I know.
It's just not the same, thank you for using that, but it's
like, because I have another one.
Okay, well, go for it.
Okay, so I just would love to play this little, very simple example of the idea of some of what you were talking about with regard to text and what we experience as instrumentalists, and the idea of trying to bring the words to life. And that's Sound the Trumpet by Purcell, and that's from the birthday ode to Queen Mary. And in this beautiful, simple little tune, I'm going to read the text. And it's so easy to see how they're bringing the words to life through gestures and shapes and motions. Sound the trumpet, till around you make the listening shores rebound. On the sprightly hautboy, that's the oboe, play all the instruments of joy that skillful members can employ to celebrate the glories of this day. And if you listen to what the singers do on the word sound, how they grow their sound and they add their vibrato, how they ricochet their technique. You were talking about vocal technique to reflect the word rebound. The sprightly hautboy, the bright oboe, the glory of the day. And the text is underneath, but I thought it would just be a really sweet example to see this idea of, the word painting that brings our music to life. Oops.
I'm glad you used that example because I was wondering if it would come up at any point during this conversation about castrati. You can't really get, as much as I hate bringing it up, you really can't get around to talk about.
Yeah, why not? You know, the castrati, they were the rock stars of the day.
Yeah, they were.
They were the highest musicians paid at the time. And all of the virtuosic pyrotechnic opera arias of Handel were written for the castrati. And of course, it's no longer practiced today, but the voice of the countertenor.
I mean, that was amazing.
It is a supreme sound. And to hear the music sung for that voice as it was originally intended, it really adds to there's nothing like it. Did you want to say anything else? Did you want to, anybody?
Well, for those that don't know, and I'll just go ahead and say what that is, for those that don't know. In the Baroque period, men or boys who had phenomenal voices, they would enact a surgery that would cause them, for their voices to not change as they aged, which, you know, is interesting now because obviously, like you said, that this is not practiced today. So it always comes up, you know, it's like a female can't sing that, you know, even though it's written in a female's register, it's not the same sound at all. And I think that was pretty obvious there. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say about that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a practice of the past, but we can still bring this music to life in a very effective way. And there are male altos and male sopranos as well that have very high range in
Yes.
they've trained their voices. It's just beautiful.
It's amazing. I really don't. They've got a lightness that is difficult for many, you know, female vocalists to attain. You know, when I was talking a minute ago about that, what I call about the timbre, really, the timbre of a voice. The Baroque period was a time when the voice was showing off a lot, as you saw. There's so much ornamentation there, but what we call bel canto was not till much later and after this time period, where you have that really just booming, dramatic soprano, big voices. That was not sought after in the Baroque period. So the castrati was, like you said, they were the superstars. It wasn't until much later
that slightly heavier color that the female could not. So
yeah.
Well, and
thank
it's
you, Amanda.
a product of the fact that you know, you didn't have females involved in early opera,
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken. So
exactly.
males would play both roles. So
Yeah, exactly right. And the same goes true in sacred works as well. Women were not allowed to sing in church during the early Baroque.
Yeah, go
Well,
ahead, Vance.
also a feature of physical development of the castrati is that the upper body especially, would continue to develop. And so the castrati all had these huge lungs, and the lung capacity, the breath capacity of the castrati could go through these long melismatic phrases. And an ordinary human being wouldn't be able to do that.
So true. Well, that's a fantastic, I mean, we could have an entire class and talk on
That old huckleberry.
let alone. You know, I have to say, Todd wrote a funny question about the last excerpt. Where was the trumpet? But interestingly, the two voices, and Amy, you can attest to this, with the traveling in thirds and sixths, that's very common writing for the trumpet sound, isn't it?
It is true, especially when we talk about some of the music of Bach and Handel and others, where we have those two clarini parts. That would be a common style of writing. And listening to the recordings made me think, if anybody is watching and they're kind of finding a new love for Baroque music and they want to go in search of some other things, there are some amazing videos available that feature a British trumpet player. Her name is Alison Balsam. She's fantastic. She does a lot of different things, but she has a good interest in period instruments. And she's done some recording in fabulous churches of these types of works, of some Purcell, I believe some Handel. And it's neat to see the videos that they put together, because you get kind of an inside look at the recording process that they're doing, but you also get to hear some amazing music. And she has a wonderful vocal style and works with her singer really, really well. So that's somebody I would absolutely recommend if you're finding that you want to go in search of more of this. Alison Balsam is her name.
That's great. And Amy, thank you for bringing that up, because I know the recording you're talking about is Handel's Eternal Source of Light Divine.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You will never be the same after you hear that piece. Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. So Vance, I'm going to swing it around to you now, because you are the continuo, and you see it from both sides. I have to just relate a fun story about a relative of mine who went to a concert and was waiting for the continuo to walk on stage. What instrument was that? So if you could tell us, what does that mean, and why is it a team? Why isn't it just one instrument?
Right, I'll share a screen too, if I may, here in a moment. But sometimes called the continuo team or the continuo group. And in early Baroque opera, that could include a theorbo, which was kind of a lute on steroids, a guitar, some sort of guitar or other lute, harpsichord, organ, maybe two harpsichords, and then the bowed instruments. So could be cello or gamba, kind of leftover, or bass, or anything like, or bassoon. So any bass line sounding instrument and any strummed or chorded instruments could be in the continuo group. And what they might see, so Alicia, here we are. So Alicia played the end of Messiah. Here's what a bass player, and the cello player and the continuo group would see. So this is the very end of Messiah, handwritten part, which is what they would see. Tell me if you can't see it. And you see these little squiggles, which are numbers. A jazz player nowadays would see a chord chart and a melody. It's approximately the same. This is code for the types of chords you need. So you see this long extended A, assume bass clef through most of this. And then the chords, you'll notice, change because the numbers change. So all the bass line players will just simply play those notes, but the strumming and the chording people will play chords over those particular notes, sometimes duplicating the bass line. And then here we have adagio or adagio, meaning we're coming to the end of the piece, and we have a nice 4/3 cadence and a lunga at the end to mark fine. So that's what it looks like for the performer.
And Vance, you've opened up the can of worms about the figures over the bass line, and yeah, I mean, there's another class. There's
Yes,
another
right.
discussion right there. Well, I see we'll have to have many more Baroque meetings.
Indeed.
Yes, the idea of it was expected that the musicians would know how to figure the bass line at sight, but also different players might interpret it differently and do different positions and different ornamentation above within the chord structure. And I just find that so interesting, and it takes such courage.
Courage and negotiation, like who's going to trill and who's not, and how do we resolve this particular note on which beat. So lots of working out. And sometimes all that kind of goes together. It's not necessarily negotiated. It's just all these dissonances are held in the air until, say, a downbeat, and then relief. We get this resolved chord.
Mm-hmm. Oh, to me, continuo playing is what an art, and a good continuo team. There's just nothing like it. You are the foundation. You are the motor underneath all that's going on above it. And yeah, it's just
it fits my temperament to be supportive in that way, to be an accompanist. So.
Yes, which
it's very
true. We're all wired certain ways, aren't we? And my goodness, yeah, that suits you to a T. That's just great.
and
Todd,
just
you
the
had a
obligatory,
question.
it's very much like a jazz rhythm section, and we're taught that in school as a way to relate to Baroque music if you don't find a natural inroad to it. But there are a lot of similarities between the practices in the 20th century for jazz music in America and then the European Baroque tradition. Like the whole movement of a Baroque piece is going to have one speed, one vibe, if you will, one emotional area, as opposed to switching between speeding up, slowing down. It's going to have one tempo that goes in the rhythm section. They get to fill in that rhythm the way they want to, and that goes for the trumpet and timpani as well. There is a practice of improvising on timpani. The end phrases especially, adding huge flourishes to the end of a piece that the composer just didn't write it in, because the timpanists and the trumpet players, they do that.
But I would also say, from a melodic standpoint, the expectation for improvisation is another thing that is shared between those two time periods. And typically to kind of play the piece first time through kind of as notated and then go back and fill in ornamentation. I know Alicia and I did a recital a long time ago and spent some time talking about ornamentation and figuring out how we wanted to do that kind of as a duo. So that's another common factor between those two time periods.
Oh, absolutely. And we as treble players, we need to know what's going on in the bass line and in the chords in order to play the right notes, the extempore notes, so that they fit in with harmonically. So
were you all taught figure bass, basso continuo in your studies?
Yes, I took a course at Indiana University. It has a great early music program.
Okay.
And it was I learned scads from that. There are all sorts of manuals dating back from that period about how to do it. And we delved into that and just had weekly practices and tried our hand at it. It was wonderful.
Do you feel like there are players still up? It's like a strong practice that's still being upheld by young players, or is it?
There are purists who say, I only read like what I shared on the screen. They only read parts like that. And then when I'm lazy, or when there's just a lot of those figures looking at me and a lot of them I can't quite process fast enough, I'll read somebody else's realization of those notes and I'll be quite happy. And I'll actually take the realization and reshuffle it if I think it's not quite what I want.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think in any of these conversations, especially with enthusiasts, people who are listening to us talk, it's important, in my opinion, to point out that the musicians of that time and of much of the times that we look back to as important for the music that we present together or individually, they were improvisers, and they spent a lot of their time creating in the moment, given the rules of the music. So I always like to kind of bring that to the surface.
That's a really great point, Todd. And when you talk about the rules, there are primary source treatises that exist that people who really study and the purists always refer back to understand what it is that every musician was expected to know and did know with regard to ornamentation, and the freedom from what's on the page is, hopefully it's not a lost art. I mean,
Right.
it simply is not, but it's not the same as it was. Not everyone, it's not a way of life in other words now, but.
So I have a question here that's interesting from John Condon. He asked, if I was to improvise on a piece today, what would Darko say? I don't know exactly what Darko say. I would like to think that if I did it with expertise and having referenced some of those historical documents that say how to do it, and it was appropriate for the style period, I know that he would support that practice. But you haven't heard that happen. A lot of times we don't play much Baroque music, or we haven't lately. A lot of times what will happen is at church jobs, I will have a director of a job that will say, please add a flourish here, or they'll even be more specific and write in parts for us to play. But I'm sure Darko would, and I don't know if he's listening, but I'm sure he would support it if it was done tastefully. And
don't worry, I'll relay the message. No.
Gotcha.
Amy, I'm not sure you saw the question in the chat. I'm not sure if you have that feature on your iPad. When did the mute appear for the trumpet?
Oh, it's been a long time since I did my doctoral studies. I know that kind of middle 1700s, you would have seen references to like hand stopping, which in some cases could help bend the pitch a little bit. But generally, I would place it probably around that time period, later 1700s. I know the music that I see it showing up in the most is Romantic period, when we get into some things that are looking for different colors. And then certainly the 20th century is when you're going to see just an explosion of the different sound timbres that are requested and kind of explored.
So the mute is not when the soprano stepped in front of the trumpet player.
That's one way to cut the volume down, but.
So Amy, just to tell you, you were talking about the drums and trumpets coming in from outdoors. The oboes were also a ceremonial instrument. I'm not going to go on long because we have gone over a little bit past 8 o'clock. But the oboe was also originally an outdoor instrument called the shawm, part of the outdoor ceremonial band. And at that time, they had mutes that went over as they were making their transition into the Baroque oboe. And I know that we'll have more Baroque talk at some point, and I'll go into the oboe then. But it's a very beautiful instrument. As you can see, it's modeled after columns, Greek columns. You've got the capital, the balusters, and the shape of a column. Beautiful. So
that is a loud instrument. Loud. Is it not? It is loud and piercing, right?
The shawm is the Baroque oboe. No, is the
yes.
indoor instrument.
Okay.
Yes. But the shawm.
Gotcha.
Woo!
So this one is the oboe that we're seeing.
Oboe, right. Yeah. This is
okay.
18th century counterpart. 1720.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So, Amanda, can you?
Yeah.
Do we need to wrap this up?
I think so. We could go on all night. I think we could do a series on this alone. I think.
I tell you, there is so much to talk about in this glorious period of music, and this was just a fabulous panel. I'm just in awe of all of you, and just grateful to be friends and colleagues. And thank you so much to the audience and families of the Asheville Symphony and all of ours out there. I will say, if we have piqued your interest, make your interest known. I'm sure that this has to be the time where we can explore, and there is incredible Baroque music for chamber size groups, for orchestra, and orchestras learning to play with the correct rhetorical style. You can have a modern orchestra sound as beautiful. It won't sound the same, but it can sound as refined and hip, historically informed performance. So thank you all. This was just a joy.
Thank you. Thank you for all of you for attending this evening, as you just said. And for those of you that are watching, if you would like to watch this recording or share this with a friend who wasn't able to attend this evening, please visit our website and go to ASO at Home. This will be uploaded tomorrow, so you can share that. And please join us next week and the weeks to come. If you are looking for any more information or you have any other specific questions for any of the musicians, please feel free to reach out to any of us over at the Asheville Symphony, and we can get those answered for you and connect you with the musicians. I can be reached at ajvollrath@ashevillesymphony.org, or you can just visit our website and figure out how to get in contact with us. So again, thanks for everybody for attending. It's nice to see you, at least virtually. So y'all have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for your support.
Yes, thank you.
Be well.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, bye everybody, and bye for now. We'll be back.
Bye, Amy.
Bye, Todd. Great to see you.
Good
Bye,
to see
Vance.
you.
Bye.
Thank you all for arranging this.
Yeah, thank you.